Greetings. Welcome to our next session together. Today we're going to be closing out the chapter of Genesis 21, specifically verses 22 through 34. So go ahead, pause the video at this time, and read through that in your groups, and then we'll resume. Okay. Now, a little bit of context for this story. The story seems as if it's kind of inserted here as we've been focusing on Ishmael and Hagar, and Isaac and Sarah as well in the earlier portion of the chapter, and then there's this small section here outlining a covenant that Abraham makes with Abimelech. Anytime that there's something like this that's a little bit outside of the flow or the context of the surrounding passage, you could ask questions about the chronology, whether this is sort of a flow of events that we traditionally like, or was this, did this event take place at some earlier or later time? We're not really sure on that, but it does seem, I will say, it seems like we're kind of tying up some loose ends before we get to chapter 22, which of course is the sacrifice of Isaac. That is a pinnacle in the Abrahamic story, and we've been building up to it. And so it seems here the human author, Moses, might be tying up some loose ends here in this. Now this, of course, this is an important section of Scripture to include, and I think it's fitting that it's dealt with so that all of the focus then can be back on Abraham and God calling him to offer Isaac. It's kind of inconsequential as far as the timeline goes, but we've seen Abimelech several times already, and we see him again later. As was mentioned before, Abimelech may very well be a title, more so than a name. The reason I'm saying that is because there was a couple of past events where it seems like a subsequent Abimelech had forgotten or something, was unaware of previous encounters with Abraham. And then also later on we have an encounter with Abimelech and Abraham's son Isaac. And so it would seem, if we're talking about different generations and there's this figure that's continually showing up, it's likely dealing with him and his posterity, and sort of a transference of title. And so this account, a few things that I want to note here. Abimelech and his military commander, Phicol, come to Abraham, and they are proposing a treaty or a covenant with Abraham. And this is brought on because Abraham has been sort of journeying around in his land, and they've had some interactions, but they're also recognizing that God is with Abraham. And so this is important because here we have a pagan ruler who is recognizing the supernatural favor that Abraham and his family has. And so it would make sense then for Abimelech, for the sake of himself, his household, his descendants, his people, it would make sense that he would want to essentially be on the right side of that. And so he is coming to establish this covenant with Abraham, so that they can all live in peace together. Now, a couple things to note here. In verse 23, he says, "Now therefore swear to me by God." He doesn't say your God, he just says God. And then he says that you will not deal falsely with me. Now that's important because in past instances, Abraham has dealt falsely with him, that he was not totally honest about his relationship with Sarah, and that of course caused problems for Abimelech. We had talked about that. So he's wanting to try to avoid any of this in the future. But then he says that you will not deal falsely with me, or with my offspring, or my posterity, but that according to the kindness that I have done to you, you will do to me, and to the land in which you dwell. Okay. This word here, kindness, it might be translated differently in some of your English Bibles, but I do want to note that this is the word hesed. And that is a very, very strong word. When we use the word kindness in place of it in English, it doesn't really capture the full essence of what it means. Okay, so we're talking about covenant commitment. We're talking about, I like the translation, steadfast loving kindness. Okay, this is covenant love. It is it's very much a godlike love. It's kind of it's unconditional. It's fierce in its protection of the covenant, and it's a level of commitment that is not just about it's not just about feelings. It's a promise to act lovingly and act in someone else's best interest. And so I oftentimes will mention this word. I'll talk about this word. We talk about it in premarital counseling a lot that I have with couples, and even wedding ceremonies. This is such an important concept. Now, at this point in the biblical narrative, this is very early on. We find the word hesed. This is the third time that it's used. The first time was in reference. It was in Genesis 19:19, and you might want to look that up. That is where the angels are forcefully dragging Lot and his family out of the city, and they're doing so because of their hesed. I mean, there's this immense care that is shown for Lot and his family there. The next time it's used is in Genesis 20, verse 13, and that's in reference to an earlier encounter with Abimelech, between Abraham and Abimelech also again. And then here, Abimelech uses it, and he is wanting Abraham to act in this fashion, to show and to commit his hesed, his steadfast loving kindness to Abraham, or to Abimelech, and to his offspring. Now Abraham does agree to this, and they go through the ceremony of performing a covenant. Again, if you want to look at what that would entail, you can refer back to Genesis 15, where God makes this covenant with him. And there's it literally, in Hebrew, it's literally cutting a covenant, because you would always take animals and you would sacrificially cut them, and you would walk between the pieces and you would recite the terms of the covenant, and that's how covenants were done then. In Genesis 15, that of course was a very unique thing, because God had Abraham prepare this covenant, and they would call it the blood path, this path that one would walk between the pieces of these animals because of the bloodshed. But in that instance, of course, it was very unique, because God appearing as a burning torch or a furnace or something, and it's very odd there, but God himself shows up and walks that path in Genesis 15. But at least there you get the idea of what a formalized covenant back then would have looked like, and it was very much animated. It was very much acting out the terms of the covenant. There is an issue, however, that Abraham raises, and that is that there was a well that he had dug, Um, and some of Abimelech's men had seized this well from them, and Abraham was wanting it back. Now, the word there for seized, this was a forceful, violent takeover. So this would have involved, it doesn't say that it involved any loss of life, but it very well could have. It was a forceful takeover of this well. Now, of course, Abimelech claims that he knew nothing about it. There's no Abimelech has acted pretty fairly. I mean, he has really sort of always been on the up and up, even though Abraham hasn't always been that. And so there's no reason to assume that Abimelech was not telling the truth here. It's possible that he knew about it and he was lying, but again, from what we know about Abimelech, there's no reason to assume that. He probably didn't know that his men had done that. And so Abraham, and good for him, Abraham is becoming a little bit more bold here, and he is calling out this issue at the very outset, that this is something, if we're going to form a covenant and we're going to sort of live in peace with one another, then there's some things that need addressed. And that was one of the things he mentioned here. Further down in this text, then, in verse 33, we're given a new name for God. And this is something that periodically, especially through the book of Genesis, because of course it's at the beginning, we're given some new names for God that highlight certain parts about him and his nature. And here it is the Lord, the everlasting God, or El Olam, the everlasting God. Part of what is motivating Abimelech to establish this covenant, and if you notice, he's establishing it not just with Abraham, but with Abraham's descendants. And then, of course, also his reason for doing this is because he's looking out for his own descendants. He knows that if God is with this Abraham and with his family, then he's probably going to be here a long time, and his descendants are going to be here a long time. And so it's going to be important that there is peace maintained between these two peoples. And I find it's fascinating that Abimelech is affirming the fact that Abraham will have descendants and that God's favor will continue on with his descendants. I think that's the whole reason that he is doing this, because if God's favor was only with Abraham and then it was essentially going to die off, or if he was not going to have any viable children or anything, then there's no reason really to form this covenant that's supposed to last generations. And this emphasis in this passage on God being everlasting. And I want you guys think about this and talk about this in your groups, because what we're seeing here is, even though Abraham does indeed waver at times in his faith, he is growing in it, and he is definitely showing progress. And we're about to see, again, this sort of climax in terms of the testing and the proving of his faith in the next chapter. But it's important to note that God is sort of this anchor. He is immutable. He doesn't change. He is everlasting. And so, again, this pagan king Abimelech is recognizing some things about Abraham's God. And it's being noted here in the text that God does not change. He is not like anything else. There's nothing like him. There's no other God like him. He is consistent and constant in his purpose. And he has made this covenant with Abraham, and he is going to keep it. and he's going to keep it to his descendants. And this gets reaffirmed later to Isaac, gets reaffirmed to Jacob, and so on. And so I think this is a crucial thing for us to just think about, how God is outside of time, He is constant. The things that we can learn about Him are things that will not change. He will always be with us. These are things that are simply because of the virtue of His own nature and the way He is. In spite of, our shortcomings, our failures, God is always there. He is faithful. He is constant. And the last thing I want to say on this is, when it comes to reflecting on this, when it comes to the understanding of one's children, one's posterity, that that's an important thing, I think, for us to lean into. That yes, God has been faithful to us. He has shown that, and He will continue to be faithful to His people. And so we can trust Him with our offspring, with our descendants, with those who will come after us. We don't have to exhibit sort of a level of control. We have responsibility, of course, but there are certain things that we need to trust God and rely on God for. And this is going to be a lesson that is solidified for Abraham in the very next chapter. And so in the next couple weeks, we'll be spending probably at least the next 2 weeks looking at Genesis 22, because again, this is a highlight, perhaps the highlight in the story of Abraham, and it depicts beautifully the message of the gospel. It foreshadows that in a very powerful way. And so, again, discuss some of these things in your groups. And as usual, I'll be praying for you, and I wish you well. Thank you.